So shalom, everyone. It's great for me to be here in Be'er-Sheva. Thank you so much for having me. It's a wonderful space, so I'm really enjoying it. Looking forward to conversations later. I have to warn you, you never know how long the session goes. So the last time I went with the session, it took probably 6 hours from the start to the end. I don't know about you, how much time you have today. I'm not kidding, by the way. I'm not kidding. So it can go long because it ends up with all kind of conversations and everything. So I'm really looking forward to see what it's going to be today. But I always go ahead and ask myself, so okay, I'm in this new place where I've never been to before. So what do people connect with Be'er-Sheva? And I asked my brother, because he of all people always knows. And he said, I know exactly what I connect with it. And he said, right? And that's very cool because, you know, it's really cool to kind of have a really cool football club here. And he is a big fan, so his head's high, and he's really proud, this is his quote, of this game for some reason. I don't know what happened here, but he's very proud of that game. So thank you, and I hope that Be'er-Sheva is going to keep going like this. But this is not what the talk is going to be about. Now, I need to tell you a story. Actually, it's kind of maybe 3 or 4 stories in one. And more specifically, it's a story of the things that we learned. And sometimes on the design side, sometimes on the front-end side, I want to kind of show what is happening on the web today, maybe at least from my perspective. Because 50% of my time is spent on Smashing, which I co-founded back in the day. But 50% is also spent in companies, trying to figure out some responsive problems most of the time. And it can be front-end or UX or anything in between. How many of you are actually developers? So who is a designer? Who is a developer? Diviners here? Many people are actually somewhere in between. It's always very hard to say these days. So I'm telling, and don't worry, it will be kind of both for designers and for developers. So let's start. Now this is me. This is how I used to look like back in the day. Things change over time. I used to live in this wonderful little spot right here in the south of Germany, very close to Switzerland. It was a really bad idea to set up a company there because there is no community, nothing. And actually, even like 10 years later now, it's beautiful, but you know, there is no community, nothing. It really is beautiful. If you go to the old town, it's like all those, you know, traditional German buildings and all this stuff. It's really beautiful. And the Black Forest is right around the corner, so you can just go out for like within 20 minutes, be in places like this and enjoy your meditation or whatever you like. So the problem is, I was never really happy in Germany. So I was born in Belarus, which is why мы можем поговорить по-русски в принципе тоже, if you speak Russian, or Polish, because I learned Polish in a while, or German, or English, whatever works for you. I just don't speak Hebrew yet, so please bear with me. But, you know, I was born in Belarus. Then when my parents decided to move in 2000, we moved to Germany, and then I spent 15 years of my life in Germany. Studied computer science there, mathematics. I was supposed to become a hardcore PHP developer, according to my father, and I failed on PHP because I was so bad in PHP. So I decided to move to the bright side, front end. And then I actually did a lot of CSS. But the interesting, important thing is, so I moved to Germany, and I spent like 15 years in Germany. But then I wasn't happy in Germany. So I got married, and then I got divorced 6 months later. That was not a good sign. And in Freiburg, where the company was located, it was always weird. It was like there was no community, there was nothing that would really keep me there. So after a lot of struggle, I actually moved away. I packed everything. Actually not packed, just sold everything. And it was an interesting story, by the way. I will get to the web design part, don't worry. But I think it's really interesting too, because you know, I wasn't happy there. So at the time I thought, okay, was talking to our secretary, and she said, you know what, do you need an apartment? You're traveling all the time anyway. So, you know, you're speaking and workshops and consultancy and all this stuff. Why don't you just cancel on the apartment? And I said, that's a good idea. So just a few days later, she gives me like a letter to the owner of the place. And, you know, I always sign whatever she gives me, right? So I just signed it, and she sent it. And 1 month later, I didn't have an apartment. You know, I actually canceled an apartment without moving in anywhere. So I thought maybe it's a sign. So I sold everything I had. And it turned out that everything you have and you own can be actually minimized and compressed, being brought down to this, an umbrella. It's really hard to compress. And a few boxes. and everything else has become digital for me for some reason. That was interesting. And so this was kind of my baggage after 25 years of life. That was very, very surprising. And then you start traveling and you think normally this is what your life would be, right? You're traveling somewhere and you're freelancing and you're enjoying a little cocktail and you have wonderful view and you have perfect power and so everything, well, indeed sometimes it's like that. So I'm very lucky and privileged to be able to travel so much, right? And so sometimes you get things like this. I also like taking pictures of moving objects or not so moving objects. I'm not even sure what it means, but I kind of liked it. You also find some really strange statues and things that are not supposed to be things and stuff. Signs, I love signs. Huge signs, small signs, different kind of signs. Really interesting typography sometimes. Finnish is the best. You can just walk around Finland and you'll find so many strange words. It's incredible. Sometimes really huge letters. This is one from Canada. This is one from Switzerland. Sometimes 1, 9, and 19 is supposed to be pretty decent and huge, right? Or 14. Like Switzerland is really big in this. This is one from Lithuania. No, from Denmark actually, from Copenhagen. Like letters everywhere, including drunk letters sometimes. This is one of my favorite ones. You're just another brick in the wall. It's a bit sad, but I have another one which is funnier. I think. Yeah, it's pretty cool. That's kind of nice. So I always try to find this place and I pay a lot of attention to all of those signs and textures and probably if I had a bit of time I would probably take pictures of a lot of stuff in here as well. And that's kind of cute. I kind of like this. So this really brings me to this point that I really like to explore, like to figure out things, like to experiment. And when I do front-end and when I do UX, there is a lot of experimentation involved all the time. So I would pull my photos, and I have like thousands of them, and I would just literally try to figure out, maybe I can use some kind of texture like this, or maybe I can use some kind of treatment, like typographic treatment and so on. Okay, we don't have to go this way. But there was another thing that I really like. I like going to museums and taking pictures of signs prohibiting me from taking pictures of signs. I think it's very cool. And wine, and coffee. And I was actually working in a coffee shop because for pretty much every single place in the world, I have a list of things I like to do there and places that I love. And so I keep going to a few coffee shops here and there, including the one in Tel Aviv. And they know me because, I'm very annoying most of the time. And so they create this kind of stuff for me all the time. And I said, coffee, boring. Everybody does coffee. Let's go soups. So now I also have some places where they do that for me with soups, which is kind of cute. One thing that you should take away from this, please do not go to grocery stores and don't try to take pictures of products in stores. Police and security don't like that most of the time. So I get in a lot of trouble if I do this. But after a lot of traveling, a lot of Airbnb-ing, a lot of being everywhere, I finally moved to Lithuania, of all places. How many of you have been to Lithuania? Where? Okay, it says, Lithuania. It's not far away from Poland or Belarus, or Poland or Belarus. And so this is what it looks like. There is one thing, it's a really great place to be. It's dynamic, there is a lot of design culture happening right now, but it's very cold. Very cold. Like really, really, really cold. Your phone doesn't work outside if you're going out. This is kind of a deal breaker. But apart from that, I'm very happy and I found someone there I love, so it's wonderful there. But this is kind of just to give you some context about who I am and where I'm coming from. And what I want to talk about today is kind of what we learned while moving away from this to this, which was or is an 18 months long journey where we learned a lot of stuff. We moved everything, we changed everything, the design, the user experience, the backend, the front end, everything. And there are many, many things we learned along the way. And if you don't like red, which is perfectly acceptable and fine, you will also get a white version as well. Now I have to ask you one important thing. Who is a cat person? Who is a dog person? Oh, that's way more dog people. Okay, who doesn't really care? Cats or dogs? Okay, so according to my scientific survey, which I've been running over the last couple of years, apparently, I don't know why it's like that in here, but apparently 30% of people are cat people, 40% of people are dog people, and everybody else just doesn't care at all. Well, it's too late for us. In this presentation, you're going to see at least 27 cats. I'm very sorry about that, but that's too late for now. So, 4 parts. So it's probably going to take like 40, 45 minutes. But I want to look into design and some of the design decisions we made and why. And kind of the framework that we were using while designing. The front end and back end, I'm going to sum them up. Otherwise, it's going to take too much time. And a little bit of to-dos of things that we need to do still left, right? And it's not a promo talk, don't worry. It's not about me kind of highlighting how wonderful we are. We are not that wonderful. And the CSS I wrote is not wonderful either. We'll talk about it later. But yeah, so there are a couple of things I want to kind of share with you. And I want to kind of go back first when talking about design, because many of us here are designers, talking specifically about user interface design and visual design. And we had, many of us had these conversations in the past. I think over the last couple of months or so, everything is so generic, everything is so boring on the web, everything looks the same. Many of you had this conversation before? Heard of something like this? Many people lack personality. Oh, not people, many websites or people who create websites feel that their websites lack personality. And it brought me to thinking like 2 years ago, because it's not a new problem that we have here. I thought, how can we reimagine what our experience would be if we wanted to embed some sort of personality that would be unique and would be very humane? And so I want to go back maybe for like 5 minutes to think about what it actually means. And why is it that we're creating these predictable, boring products? Well, Mark Bolton said once that the design process is weird and complicated because it involves people and systems and organizations which often are weird and complicated. I'm not sure about here in Tel Aviv, here in Be'er-Sheva, or in Tel Aviv, or in Israel in general, but it's totally true in Germany. This is exactly right. And the problem is that many managers tend to think that creative process, whether you're a developer or designer, looks like this. You start somewhere, and you iterate and iterate and iterate and iterate and iterate until you hit the finish line and you're done. Now, to me personally, this is not at all what a creative process looks like. It doesn't matter if you're a designer, or developer, diviner, or developer. It doesn't matter because you always explore. Like very much like I do with my photos and everything. You just go and explore. And whenever you explore, you will hit dead ends. Imagine you have to pick a framework, or you have to pick a technique for a certain problem. Well, you start figuring out, okay, maybe I should do this, inline block, or display table, or flexbox, or grid, or anything in between. And then you start working on one of those ideas, and you kind of progress, but then you see, oh, damn it, dead end, because of browser support, anything in between. And then you have to reroute and find another way to continue. And it's the same for design as well. And this dead end is when we're losing a lot of time. And I don't like losing a lot of time. So we all don't like losing a lot of time, I believe, which is why we tend to rely on things that used to work in the past. Many of you might have seen this before. Which of these 2 possible websites are you currently designing? Because there are only 2 of them. There is one on the left and one on the right. And the only difference between them, maybe, the variation, is a carousel, sometimes on the top and sometimes on the bottom, right? So is it pretty much everything we can do today, only this kind of layout? So maybe we should do something different. How many of you had this conversation in the last few months? You know, let's move away from border radius 12 pixels to 14 pixels. And then maybe a month later, no, let's move back to 11 pixels. How many of you had this conversation or something along these lines? Does it matter if it's 11 or 12? Yes, of course, for designers it matters, but does it really matter? Does it make a significant difference that people are using our interfaces? Maybe we are kind of forgetting how to embed some sort of personality, and instead of pushing pixels very, very hard, and maybe we should do something about it. Because there are rules, of course, we tend to follow rules, but there are also times when we need to break those rules. So many of you have these rules kind of in our mentality as we were designing or developing. Right? There are things we're supposed to do and things we're not supposed to do. You should not define the line height in pixels. That's not cool. You don't do that, right? And you should not base the breakpoints on device sizes, because then, after all, whenever a new device comes along, like a new watch or a new something in between, you have to adapt your design to it instead of creating this continuum, kind of continuous experience, right? Mobile first and all this stuff. And you should not take the name of the Lord, performance, in vain, because performance matters. Well, you should not make your website slow. And I think maybe we should create our websites, make our websites a bit slower to slow users down. We'll get to it in a second. Because if we don't, we end up with a very strange creative process that will be familiar to most of you. Imagine having a new project, and somebody comes to you and tells you, you know what? We have this kind of navigation in mind and content. So what do you do as a designer? You open Sketch or Photoshop or something in between, and then you set up, okay, this is a website. And then somebody comes to you and tells you, no, this is not how things work. You should not start desktop first. That's not cool, right? These days we do what? Well, we start mobile first. So you say, okay, I'm going to change the canvas a little bit, make it a bit smaller, and I'm going to have my mobile view, and then I'm going to use a fantastic universal icon that everybody knows and everybody understands, and I'm going to put it in the right upper corner and it's going to stand for navigation. But then somebody comes in and tells you, no, 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 no. You should not use a hamburger icon, because if you have something important to show, just show it. It's not like you would hide an add to cart button somewhere. It's not like you would hide something that's really critical. Instead, just display it. You say, okay, I'm going to display it, but then I still have this content to organize, so somehow I have to put it in here. So you're putting it in there, and then somebody tells you, no. Do not put important stuff below the fold, because the fold is magic, right? And then you know, oh, I know exactly what to do here. Have a fantastic pattern that I always, been using, which is a carousel, but then somebody comes to you and tells you no, right? So where does it leave us as creatives? Here. This is Welcome to Creative Process 2017, right? And we can do better. We can create things like this with CSS grid layout and all this stuff. It doesn't mean that print is web and web is print. Of course it's not. But I mean, we can actually take some lessons from print and apply them meaningfully to the web as well. So I want to share a couple of stories and some kind of framework of how we can do it. And I want to show you a few stories. And one of them is Tijuana Flats. And Tijuana Flats is a chain of Mexican restaurants in the US, and this is what they look like. You might hate it, you might like it, it doesn't matter, but this is kind of their style, their unique style that they have. So they have these paintings, huge walls, and so every now and again they would be redesigning or repainting them. And they have people coming in, and these are the people, and these are the ceilings. So this is we're talking about tall, tall ceilings. And they would actually invest a lot of money to hire professional graffiti artists to repaint and recreate and tell and unfold a story every few months or so. That takes a lot of effort and a lot of resources. So obviously the menu has to reflect the personality as well, right? And it actually does. Again, you might hate it, you might like it, right? But it kind of works. And the website should do that too. This is the website. Can you think for a second how you would code it? Just for a second. And it has everything it's not supposed to have. It has a carousel, it has parallax, it has a weird image-heavy navigation, it has social media buttons, everything that's not supposed to have. But it fits with the personality. Now, in the spirit of performance, of the year of performance, of flat design, of everything we've learned over the last few years, in the spirit of getting away from parallax, and getting away from carousels, and getting away from everything we all hate, I mean all of us I believe hate, they moved away from this design to this design. And yes, it's much faster. It's ridiculously fast. There are no web fonts, almost no web fonts. It's super fast. It's really hard to get it faster. But I think there is a lot of stuff lost between this design and this design. And no company gets it better than Blomberg. Blomberg hired a bunch of designers that were given the freedom to do whatever they wanted. And they did whatever they wanted. Now why would they do it? Because Blomberg was not anything special. Blomberg was seen as one of the many, like MSNBC or like Financial Times, like everybody else. They wanted to find their own voice. I'm pretty sure you will hate it. How many of you like it from the design perspective? Okay, a few people. How many of you hate it or think it's bad? Okay, some people. So you might hate it, right? But what does it mean? So the design is supposed to serve its purpose somehow. So they sold out all of their tickets for that conference, which took place last year, within a few weeks, I believe. And it was much faster than they actually did a few years before. So in that case, although the design maybe is horrible, it actually worked and served its purpose. And they did a lot of stuff like this. I mean, there are so many features that they would create just probably for the sake of it, of being different. And of course, not everybody can pull it off, but it kind of shows how desperate some companies are in order to be different. Now, many of you might have seen the Dropbox rebranding as well. Have you? It's like this new era of brutalist design where everything is just supposed to be ugly and horrible. It's not because designers are horrible and shit, to be honest. It's because, well, everybody's trying to find that uniqueness that we all are kind of striving for. It's just sometimes it's really, really hard and you try to do something like directly opposite to whatever you're used to. And they would even create, and this is the next one you will never be able to forget, I mean, ever. They would even create features like this, which, when I look into it, it's just speechless. It's like coming back to 1998. So this is this feature which was actually had one of the heaviest, like one of the traffic heaviest this year, which was released on September 1st, 2017, this year, which is kind of about all the projects. So you have no idea what's coming up here. This is like, which is different. It's very different. I don't think that any of you would, not being drunk, create a layout or design or a sketch like this, right? And so they risk accessibility and usability for the sake of being different. Again, not everybody can pull it off, not everybody wants to pull it off, and of course they need to keep it all accessible one way or another. That's an important part of it. But this works today if you want it or not. This brings attention because everything else is just Twitter bootstrap, right? So this does work, and that's really interesting. And in fact, I see all the stuff coming in, like with the Dropbox rebranding, which is probably something that you will not like, or many designers don't like. It's kind of the same thing, trying to find that voice. And even if you don't have like this visual skills, you can still pull it off. Why? How? There is a fantastic hotel called Hans Brinker Hotel in Amsterdam. How many of you are familiar with it? A couple of people. So here's a problem. What do you do if you have a bad hotel? Now, Hans Brinker is not a good hotel, okay? It is not a good hotel. So you should not be expecting 5-star TripAdvisor reviews or great Booking.com reviews or anything of that kind. They're lucky if they get 2 stars, right? So they're not a good hotel. So what do? Well, you shut down because, no resources, or you try to invest money to make it better, or you try to make it look better, right? So all of these options were not really options for them because they didn't have the money. Because they don't have the money, so they didn't have the money. They couldn't make it look better because it's pretty shit, right? So it's not that great. So what do? Well, they hired a professional, well, semi-professional designer who was paid one burrito, and he was given the freedom again to explore. And he said, you know what? So here's the thing: we can't be the best hotel experience in the world. There is just no way of doing it. So what if we try to sell the worst hotel experience in the world? What if we remove everything good we have to make it much worse, so we sell the worst hotel experience in the world? And obviously, again, the website has to reflect this as well, right? Should I actually move it, maybe? A little bit better. Maybe it would be better. So they basically decided that we need to find that style and that personality, that kind of unique voice, which would actually, reflect it. So many things happening on the site are a little bit different from what you would expect from a traditional hotel experience, I guess. And this is by design. They would actually even go as far as hire an amateur photographer because a professional photographer would create shots which are just too good for that hotel, right? So they would really just introduce all kind of weird things that you don't want. I mean, some people say that they would actually pull in and inject insects just so it's, they stand up for whatever they, promise. Because it has to be the worst hotel experience in the world. And guess what? They're expanding to Lisbon now because they're sold out weeks in advance, right? So everybody wants to have a horrible experience. And if we talk about one like button being horrible, just have none or have 20 of them at the same time. Why not? Right? And of course, it doesn't mean that we should create inaccessible experiences and go overboard. This clearly goes overboard. I hope you appreciate the hover cursor, hover effect on the cursor. That's a bit weird, I would say. And it's kind of on this gray area. It's a bit inaccessible. You can't copy tags sometimes and stuff like that. So it's probably not what you want, but you can apply the same idea in a way to something in a slightly more subtle context, right? You can still move things around. This is a museum exhibition website. That works here, why not? You can just drag things around. It's kind of the same thing, right? And we talk a lot about those elements that we shouldn't be using. Like, how many of you like pop-ups? Who doesn't like a pop-up? Okay, many people don't like pop-up. So why don't we have kind of try to find some delightfulness in some of the elements, the most annoying elements we have. Now pick one the most boring element and try to make it delightful. this is so annoyingly delightful, I keep going to the site just to see this pop-up, right? And it kind of works on the site because it fits nicely within the personality that they have on the site, right? And just pick one boring thing and make it a bit more interesting. Now, many of you will be familiar with this. You come to this alcohol, beverage, whatever, this kind of website, and they ask you for the date of birth because you have to be able to verify your age in order to access the site. So sometimes you can type in whatever, 32nd day of 43rd month of 1547, and you can still enter the site because they don't care. They just have to provide this thing because they have to by law, right? So try to make it interesting. Here's an example for it. Austin Beer Works gets it. Are you 21? Yes or no? What if I click no? No. Well, oh, that's too bad. Well, are you at least 18? No. 17? You're not making this easy. Please tell us you're 16. Jesus Christ. 13? No way I'm going to click yes now. Well, if you're not at least 6, we're going to have serious problems. And they kind of turned everything into a little bit more delightful example. Like, well, this is pretty cool. There is no way to click yes here, by the way, which is pretty cool, right? And then you say no, obviously, and then you kind of on this video, which is angry, right? So just pick that one thing and maybe try to make something interesting out of it. Because once a person detects something like this just by accident, well, they have an emotional connection with you. Oh, here's another one, the title, right? We know why they need the email, like the e-commerce companies, why they need the title. Not because they care, just mostly because they want to spam us, right? Because they want to be able to segment the groups, like male customers, female customers. So you can just have a bit more than just Mr. and Mrs., just go overboard. Maybe you'd like to be princess today. Or field marshal, or do you feel like Earl today maybe? Or lieutenant commander, anything of that kind? That all works fairly well to me. And it actually goes all the way. So it's even longer than that, right? So that's pretty cool. Why not? And sometimes you can go and try to do something even more interesting. So I'm just like collecting these examples since it's not something you will be able to use all the time. But here on this site, once you start filling in a form, the music starts playing. So once you're finished with the form, you set up your account. It stops. Why? Because it's like elevator music. Right? That's nice. Somebody detects it. They might hate it because they have music played in the background already. Or they might think, oh, this is cute in a way, right? And please don't go overboard. Like one of the really bad examples of going overboard is a Ryanair example. Well, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but with Ryanair, when you're booking flights, or at least in the past, when you were booking flights with Ryanair, they would have insurance added in for you automatically unless you opt out. But if you want to opt out, you need to know how to opt out, because to opt out, you need to find Don't Insure Me, conveniently located in country selector between Denmark and Finland. So please don't do that, right? That's maybe a bit too much, but something like this works fairly well. Because you can, right? And so I show all these examples, right? But I think there is one important takeaway from this. And the takeaway is, well, how do we framework it? We need to have some sort of a strategy of like, what does it mean for us, all these examples? Not everybody can just go ahead and pull away, create some crazy like title selection like this. I attended a conference a while back, and Morgan Smuller, a Danish designer who is like 19 years old, he said a couple of things that kind of stuck with me for quite some time. He said, if we want to stand out today, to outperform our competitors, we need to delight customers with a remarkable design and unique, charming personality. Okay, this is like what everybody else says as well. But he also said with an unprecedented attention to detail. And when I think unprecedented attention to detail, I think these kind of websites. Can you imagine how much time and effort went into creating this? Now, if you look into it, there is a lot of stuff happening over here. This is like a homage to data art movement, like 100 years of it. And obviously the website has to reflect this somehow as well, and it does really well, right? So everything is a little bit off because, this is like an art of an expression without taking too much care of the function. There's a lot of parallax, a lot of 3D effects and all of the stuff. And to me personally, it looks like, yes, this website has a personality. This website has a unique charm around it. it has something that not everybody has, right? I think it's very unique in many ways. Can you think of any website where you said, when you went to and said, wow, what a website? Well, except the ones I showed today, maybe, right? Do websites have to be memorable? Are we creating invisible interfaces that nobody should care about? Or should we be creating something that's memorable like this? I mean, this is quite something, but not everybody can pull that off. I cannot pull that off. We don't have resources for it. So we were looking for something a bit more tangible. Because that thing that Morgan's, when he continued, he said one thing that really stuck with me. If you want to stand out today, in the end, it all boils down to one single thing: outstanding storytelling through great art direction. And when I think about storytelling, I think about things like this, right? This, fairy tale, another fairy tale, another fairy tale, but I don't think about interfaces that we're designing. This, for me, is not storytelling. This is like, I want to screw you experience, right? Now, don't get me wrong, it's not like I hate Uber, like Uber, it doesn't matter, but I asked myself one very important question. I think that some of you should be asking it as well. Why is it that if there was a service, I don't know if Uber is available here in Be'er-Sheva, it doesn't matter if it is not, but I asked myself, why is it that if there was a service like Uber, bad design, good design, doesn't matter to me at this point, but it was cheaper, maybe like 5 or 10 cents cheaper on average per drive, I would switch right away. I don't have any emotional connection to Uber at all. I don't feel any loyalty to Uber at all. It's like one of the many companies. I don't care. I'm not connected. I maybe had like 50 rides with Uber, but I don't feel connected at all. But somebody has to pay me money, so I move away from MailChimp. And don't get me wrong, I'm not stupid. It's not because of the chimp and this entire marketing that they have. Of course, it's all marketing. But it has a much more humane personality that I can connect with. It's very hard for me to connect with Uber, I think. So one of the things that MailChimp does is creating these color books, which is just distributed on the streets, like to everybody to use, for children to paint over, right? So this is what it looks like. Let's see, I'm disconnected for some reason here. And so, I love eating bananas for breakfast. So I love eating bananas for breakfast as well. So here is our connection, right here, for example. Or like this kind of wording, this is so powerful, we just tend to forget about it. Hi, I'm Freddy, it's fun to be me. Is it fun to be you? How can you answer this question in a negative way? I'm boring. I'm horrible, I'm a horrible person, I'm boring. There is no way. So it kind of almost automatically forces you to become connected with the brand, right? And it keeps going and going. There is no button anywhere saying, hey, we're MailChimp, we're the best email company in the world, right? Nothing. If you're interested in MailChimp, you will actually just Google MailChimp, you'll find out. I love being me. Do you love being you? The same thing. How can you answer this in a negative way? I hate myself. I really do. I hate myself every single day. There is no way, right? So this stuck with me, and we thought, okay, how can we apply this kind of thinking to what we are doing, right? How does it even connect to us? Because we cannot afford creating those crazy experiences like the one that I showed before. And I thought maybe we don't have to go overboard. Sometimes just something simple is enough. Of course, sometimes you can have a visual style like this, just a unique, distinct visual style, where everything is kind of boxy or has a certain specific color scheme. Sometimes you can go ahead and say, I just need a simple idea. This guy decided to split himself into 3 parts and color them differently depending on what viewport you have. That's all. That's his signature. It doesn't matter if you like it or not, but this is kind of what makes his portfolio unique. If you remove it, it's like every other portfolio on the web. Perfect grid and everything, right? Or if you remove all the silky animations and transitions from this one, it will look exactly like every single other portfolio on the web as well. Right? This simple, well not simple, but this beautiful animation that they have is the only thing that makes it unique. This is its signature. And sometimes the lack of animations can work as well. Here the delay, everything is kind of coming in delayed. So we talk about performance, like everything should be rendered fast, and yes, but sometimes there should be time and place to slow people down as well. Here all the elements kind of come with a delay, right? Artificial delay. And so, you see geometric shapes first and then they kick in. Right? Sometimes you can also play with something like with an interesting pattern. Like for example here, if you look into SBB mobile, it's kind of an interesting experience of moving from one place to another, and specifically going like Google Maps, just again for SBB, which is like a Swiss trail a train system, right? And yes, it's all very similar, but one thing that makes it different is the touch timetable that they have. So if you look into it, you see the preview of the cities that you can go from, and if you want to go from A to B, you just drag it, and that's it, that's your input. That's nice, right? So you don't have to type anything. You can create your presets, and you can set up, okay, Zurich, and maybe you often go to Lausanne, or maybe you often go to Geneva, and you do that, and you set it up, and then drag, and you're done, and you bought your ticket. Isn't it remarkable? That's one signature that's very unique to this particular experience, right? And so there are many examples like this where you just need one little thing to make it slightly different. So it's the same thing for a museum exhibition website. You want to move between different rooms or between different exhibitions, just literally move away from one to another, right? So this was kind of what I was thinking. Maybe we can just take one little thing that will become our signature and use it consistently, and at the same time find one boring thing and make it a bit more delightful. So with this in mind, we started working on the new site. And I had these thoughts like for a long time, and I kind of want to pull you through the design thinking behind it. That just to break it at this point. I don't know why it exists, but I love it. Do you want chocolate from Lithuania? Seriously, I'm not kidding. They're pretty good. Yeah. Anybody? All right. Anybody else? Oh, now we're starting. Okay. Anybody else? Oh, now almost everybody wants some. Well, okay. So I probably will be. That's pretty good. Anybody else? Last one? Okay. You want this one? Okay. All right. So I'll keep coming back to breaks because otherwise it will be boring. All right. So with this in mind, I mean, even if it means creating something like this, which is just surprising, why would it exist and who needs it? I think that we should be experimenting to find maybe we can actually make use of it as well at some point. So when we started working on the site, we started with a problem. And the problem is very simple. It has to deal, of course, with ad blockers. I know that many of you are using an ad blocker because I do as well. How many of you are using an ad blocker, actually? Okay, who is not using an ad blocker? Who doesn't want to admit that they're using an ad blocker? Okay, some people. Excellent. And don't get me wrong, I'm using it as well, but for us it was a big problem. Why? Because of advertising revenue. So we had 50% revenue decline yearly for the last 5 years, which means that at this point right now, we're approximately at 1/16 of what we used to have 5 years ago with pretty much stable traffic. And it also meant that right now, as of today, we have 66% users blocking ads. That's kind of a very clear signal that we don't want ads. So if a vast majority of our readers doesn't use advertising or doesn't see advertising, why should we display it at all? Right? This was kind of the goal, because obviously the revenue decline will not be able to help us. So advertising is kind of dying. Oh, that's very dramatic, I'm sorry. Advertising is kind of dying, but for us it was an important move to figure out a way to move away from the traditional advertising revenue towards something a bit more stable. And we've been doing it for a long time. But we're also thinking about creating this new product, and this product has to become a center of everything. You have to understand the setup. The Smasher magazine started in 2006 with just a very simple WordPress setup. It was very simple, there was nothing fancy there. But then we also built a job board, which was built on Ruby. We also set up a shop, which was first Magento, then it has become Shopify, and all of this stuff created kind of a system which was difficult to maintain, like different code bases, different styles, different themes, and all of this stuff. So the membership had to become this new product, which would be a central thing. So you need to be able to sign in, and then you would get discount for job board and for books and for everything. It was very, very difficult to implement. And we also never had a chance to actually consider and design the smashing experience, what it would even mean. So we had to figure out a way to make it work well. So we got to work, and we needed to create a tool for the magazine, a CMS for 2,500 articles, a comments engine for 200,000 comments, e-commerce platform, subscription service, job board, and membership. And all from scratch, which is why it took us 18 freaking months. And there were many people involved, and I'm here presenting, but I'm not the one doing the hard work. The design was done by Daniel and Sarah and Andrew, and there are many, many people involved. And I think it's important to show them because usually they are just behind the scenes. And we have this cat illustrator, Well, it's Ricardo. We've been working for more than 10 years now. And I was really happy to meet him last year. And he dreams in cats because we have 68 cats on the site, scattered all over the site. Now, if you find all of them, by the way, I guarantee you a business class ticket to any smashing conference of your choice, plus workshop, plus hotel, plus accommodation, plus whatever you want. You will not find them. Trust me. Oh, you can try. Some people actually started writing, I get emails by the way. Some people start writing face recognition software to scatter, like to go through the entire site because they found some cats, right? And trying to find all of them. No, this is not going to work because they are also scattered like in print style sheets and everywhere where robot cannot go. It's a long story, we'll talk about it later. But many people involved, right? To make this happen. So when we started working on it, it was all about text first. So my first mock-up looked pretty much like this. You know, no sketch, no Photoshop, paper, and just text. And I think it's very important to use text as a gateway to your design. Because once you start really thinking about the interface you're using, or the wording that you're using, you will actually get to the visual identity quite quickly. How? Well, even things like micro-interactions, like pop-up and stuff like this, could be prototyped on, in text as well. And more specifically, my gateway was not necessarily this, which looks very boring because it was one of the first ones, but something that's a bit more interesting. We started working with error messages first. Without having any visual design and nothing, we spent, well, personally, at least I, spent a lot of time working on text messages, error messaging. Right? This was kind of the first starting point. And this looks a bit weird out of context. But once you see it on the site, you'll understand how it actually plays within the entire theme. And once we had the idea of what the personality is going to be, right, we started looking into typefaces. And so this was kind of the starting point. So we picked Elena for the body copy, and we picked Mija for headings. I hate it so much. I really do. I mean, look at this A. Look at this. If you're a designer, you might think, what the hell is happening here? Yes, I'm not a big fan of it, but it actually fits in with our personality. Why? Because we did research, and when we started looking and asking people like you, so, how do you connect? What do you connect smashing with? They would say things like friendly, open-minded, and things like that. I always wanted, when we set up the magazine, I wanted to be like a professional, respected publication, right? But it was not what I was hearing from interviews. And in fact, many times people would say things like cats. Now, don't get me wrong, I have nothing against cats, but I didn't want my legacy to be cats. This is not what I want, right? But there is a reason for it, and the reason is we have like 5 conferences a year, and all these conferences have cats all over the place. And we have to promote these conferences, and every conference has a cat as a mascot, so people see a lot of cats. And in fact, if you start looking, you will see many, 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 many cats. So it was a decision. Should we kind of go against it and try to be respected and professional and formal in a way? Or should we just embrace the catorama? And I said, well, what the hell? I personally don't like cats. I really don't, but it was too late because all the branding for the conferences was already cats. So I said, okay, so many, 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 many cats. In fact, there are many. I mean, there are literally, I'm not kidding, there are 68 cats scattered all over the interface. So good luck finding them. But it was also not just about the mascot. It was not, the thing. Another important thing was finding the right angle. And I actually literally mean it. Because, well, we were playing with all kind of layouts at first to find out what our unique style would be, including vertical headings, for example. And in the end, we thought, what would be our signature? Remember what I was talking in the beginning? That one thing that would be very distinct to you. And we thought, the website, the logo, has this tilting. It used to be 10.6 degrees. And so the first thing we did is actually redesigning it. Now it's 11 degrees. It's a big step for us. Moving from 10.6 to 11 degrees is a big step. But I thought maybe it could be the signature. So maybe we could just play with this kind of thumbnails and images and everything being tilted by exactly 11 degrees. That would make it unique in a way, right? Because nobody else has it. And so we started looking into it. And this is kind of one of the very first mock-ups. And we ended up creating a living style guide as well. And in that living style guide, we also had all those elements listed. And as you can see, things kind of are all tilted in here as well, and including these things over here. But Then we started working on it a bit more intensely, and we ended up like having those drop caps, which of course had to be tilted, and everything else had to be tilted. And so this is kind of how it evolved over time, right? So everything tilted by 11 degrees with a border radius of 11 pixels. It's never going to change because it's fixed. That's it. Everything is 11 pixels and 11 degrees, right? And even micro interactions were actually designed this way as well. So there are many, many images here. It's just an evolution of the design, so to say. But then we ended up with this as a final result, right? And I know that most of you will hate it because I've been in user interviews where people tell me that they hate it. That's okay. The reason why you hate it, most of you, probably, is because there is so much space floating or left to author. And it's a very conscious decision. And the reason for it is because most of the time authors adjust the byline somewhere at the top of the page or at the bottom of the page. And I would rather give authors too much space than too little. So I think they deserve this space. So this is not going to change. I'm sorry. But other things are tilted as well. So this is the form, which is of course tilted. But once you start interacting with it, it actually untilts itself. And there are some fancy checkboxes you can play with, if you want to, right? But also many things like the directions and stuff, they're actually happening from that side as well. So it was really, really important because this kind of, the tilting has become our signatures. That's the one thing. And again, don't get me wrong, it's not like that crazy website that I showed before where you do everything weird and crazy and strange. It's just one little thing that's used consistently all over the place, right? And then the front page turned out to become this as well. Now, one thing that we chose to do, it was really, really important too, to avoid any kind of noise or friction. So one thing that was very annoying for me, like for example, if you just switch between tabs, sometimes you will see a jump, like 1 pixel jump. And so what I would do, I was actually started doing like a year ago or so, just recording many sessions of video, like of me accessing the site or others, and going slow motion in the evening, like afterwards. Once you go slow motion, you can see so many things that you would never see before. So I would do this kind of stuff and record it and then see exactly what is happening in the interface, just outlining, right? And so I have tons of files like this, where we just go like 500 milliseconds there, 500 milliseconds there, and see exactly what is actually happening and why. If the transition is right, and things like this. So this has been like my job for the last year or so. But you will find so many things if you just really stare at the screen for a while. Like looking at the animation and what exactly is happening, having a video is, I think, very, very important. And of course, it also requires you to have some focus. Like imagine you wake up in the morning and somebody reports a bug like this. This is probably not what you want to see in your interface, right? And at the same time, you're getting an email from your cat illustrator who tells you that he designed new cats. I'm like, wow, that's nice. That's nice. That's cool. All right. And you think, huh, I actually wanted to change something in my interface as well. This is a checkout, right? And there is something that's super annoying. I mean, I would print out things like this and I would stare at them for like hours because I feel like something is wrong or is missing. Can you spot that little something? Maybe there are a couple of things here. One thing that's really annoyed me for a long time and I couldn't get why is this. That's so annoying, isn't it? Maybe? No? Yes? So that's really crazy because this is not right. This is not supposed to be like that. So, you know, just add some soft hyphens and stuff into it and, you know, because normally it's all small caps, right? But then 7 and dash I interpret it as a string, so 7 is not small caps, although it should because it's not recognized as a number. Long story because of the typeface. So obviously you have to type in that, add in a soft hyphen so it looks right. I hope you appreciate the difference between this and this because I do. Okay, maybe not. That's okay, right? But there are many things like this. And in the end, like this screen, I'm just going to show it here. This screen, there are many things going on here, but there are also something that are kind of, well, maybe cute, maybe not cute, doesn't matter, but it's kind of, it's all embeds like the personality that we actually started working on from the very start. Like well, this thing, according next to the error messages, was actually one of the first, I don't know, conceptual text designs, if you like, that we developed way early on. Two things. First of all, everything that you need in the checkout is right here. There shouldn't be any concerns about anything, like free airmail shipping to everywhere. We show you when you're going to deliver that item, where it's going to be delivered, because you know we read it from your city or from your country here. And filling, smashing, priceless, right here. And also this fancy checkbox. I don't know if you can read it in the back. It says, I just like ticking off large checkboxes. So you might want to play with it and find out if something happens if you tick it off or not. I'm not going to reveal it for you just yet. But there are many things in here, including the discount code. Now, okay, wait, okay. So discount codes. I'm just moving away from what I want to speak about, but I think it's important. So imagine you want to buy something and you see this discount code, coupon code, and you don't have a coupon code. So what do? It's not like you're going to skip and just move on, do you? No. So I look at you now and I feel like I sense a little something here. Because I spent a lot of time in e-commerce, like working on e-commerce projects in Germany. So there are options. Now, what most people would do is, of course, go on Google and try to find one if they don't have one. How many of you do that? Okay, so many of you do that. So you have a particular pattern that you're using. So if you want to buy something from Dell, you're going, what is it, like November? Yeah, you will go to Dell coupon, November 2017. Sounds familiar? Because there are many those spammy websites that don't really have a coupon code, but they just want to get the traffic. So okay, we know that many people go. So should we just dismiss it, or should we do something with it? Now here are two options, and totally deviating, but it's important. So imagine you have one customer who doesn't have a coupon code, goes on Google, can't find the proper one, because to be honest, like 8 out of 10 times we don't find the proper coupon code, because we try, but we still will try. So imagine you didn't find one, and so you're like, okay, so you continue checking out. And another case is, you do find one, you plug it in, you see a green check mark around it, and checkbox and everything, and you're like, I tricked the system, right? So there are two different mental states. Now, what if you measure the conversion and the financial outcome per day if you have first experience? Most people have the first experience, and if people have the second experience. Now, you will see a significant difference. So we thought, let's make something out of it and just test. So one thing would be the baseline, just do nothing. Don't have a coupon code, screw you, your problem, not my problem. This kind of mentality, right? Second option is to say, okay, we're going to create a dedicated coupon page. So if you Google it, because you'll probably Google, you will find it, and you can use it, and you stay on the site. That's a good thing, right? A third option is, okay, so if people Google anyway, so let's just submit the coupon code to all of those horrible farms, coupon farms. And so they have a valid coupon code, so by the end of every month, you're going to submit a new one, so people have the positive experience finding the valid coupon code, right? And option number 4, let's tie it in, so at least we have some benefit, like you have to subscribe to a newsletter, and then you're going to get a coupon code, and this kind of thing. So, what do you think works best? Who thinks that doing nothing as a baseline, just no coupon code works best? In terms of financial outcome per day at the end of the day. Okay. Who thinks that having a dedicated coupon page works best? Okay. Who thinks that having a newsletter or something like that works best? Yeah, because people have to sign up, right? Who thinks that adding a coupon code to coupon farms works best? Okay. Oh, you're smart people here in Be'er-Sheva. Yes. In fact, yes. It doesn't matter if you have a dedicated coupon page, people don't trust it. They go and say, I'm still going to go on Google. I'm still going to try to find a better one because, this is like the baselines, whatever. So people still go on Google all the time. They don't trust dedicated pages. They don't trust newsletters the same way. Whatever comes from the company, it's not that as trustworthy as a third-party website somewhere on the internet, on Google. Right? So they still go and they still try to find one, but then most of the time they don't find one. That's a problem. In fact, if you want to improve your performance, you just make sure that you have a valid coupon code to be that easy to be found in Google. But we tested something else as well. So if you search, if you add in, because I know that it works, if you add a discount code, and so you don't have a coupon code, and you try to find one, and you find somewhere something like YGLF, but it's invalid, it says, uh-oh, that code seems to be fishy. Why don't you try fish instead? So you're like, oh, okay. You get 1% discount with fish. Now, here is the reason. There is no way anybody will abandon seeing this. They feel like they unlocked an achievement. They will go to their neighbor if they need to and get their credit card to pay. So if you have a credit card declined message or anything of that kind, or PayPal doesn't, or like slow connection, oh, they will not buy, right? They will go all the way, as much as they can, as far as they can to buy it, if they find this, right? And yes, we're losing 24 cents on this purchase, right? But it is worth it. So I highly encourage you to actually do that too. And there are many things like this going on everywhere in the interface. But there's a lot of thought has been given to many, many things, including, for example, a print style sheet. Now, I'm very lazy, right? So I thought we don't want to invest in the creating like buying a PDF module and all of this, and it's not out of the box. So we need to find a better way of doing this. So I thought, oh, okay, we can just have a print style sheet that takes care of it. So we created a nice PDF style sheet for invoices. So you can download PDF invoice, just, it's nothing big, but we spent a lot of time working on it. And even if you print out an article, because we thought maybe we could reuse these articles for ebooks. Wouldn't it be nice if you just printed it and it was like an ebook, like obviously PDF? And so if you print out a page, an article like this, it has an actually beautiful, I think, beautiful magazine-alike layout, so you can just save it and read it and print it out. So it's pretty much like we can just merge like 5, 7 articles in the PDF and we've got the ebook. That's nice. That's pretty cool. It also will contain footnote links and stuff like this, right? And yes, there are many things. Like for example, again, because you have to understand one thing from this. I'm very lazy, and I try to find some kind of interesting solutions that work. So one thing is because we moved to another stack, technical stack, didn't want to set up scripts and for contact forms and all of this stuff. So we have this membership, right? And if you click on the need a custom plan, and you need to get information from the customer, I thought normally we would have what? We would have a form. Your name, last name, what you're interested in, this kind of stuff, right? So I thought maybe we can actually skip it. So once you click on need a custom plan, get this little view here, request a custom plan, right? And what does it do? Well, it just opens up an email client where you have your first name, last name already in there. It adds your email, and then it adds the subject line, and it pre-writes your body copy, so you just send it. And that's nice, I think. The problem is, of course, if you don't have a client at all, you use only Gmail or like a third-party computer, it will not work. We are working on it, right? But that's kind of the idea, right? And so there are many things like this that you can find in the interface as well. And one thing that was funny, so you start up a page like in GitHub and say, I want to take care of conference page stuff today. And you start working on what? Like minor type adjustments for speakers and talks, blah, blah, blah. But then you get an email from Illustrator. More cat illustrations, adding new cat illustrations, horizontal lines for meow content. And yes, we actually went this way to try to figure out if we can use emoji in HTML and CSS, because we can, right? The problem is that we have like 7 or 8 cat emoji, and they look different on different platforms, so it makes debugging difficult in a way. So we moved away from emoji, but we actually stuck with the hamburger icon, because why not? I think it makes perfect sense. Highly encourage you to use it as well. I think it's pretty cool. And it's great for gzip as well, right? And there are a couple of things we also learned the hard way. One of them is email verification. So how many of you do this? You're asked to verify or confirm your email. Like you have your email input field, and then you have confirm your email. How many of you would copy paste? Okay, because we're smart people, right? So we don't want to do the extra work. Now, in fact, many people do. And so some developers, creative developers, came up with 2 brilliant solutions, which everybody hates. First solution, let's block copy-paste. That's wonderful. Everybody loves it. Everybody's so enjoying it. It's unbelievable. Second one that I found was really interesting, to say, instead of having a second input field saying confirm email, I'm going to break it down, like the one before the @ symbol, and the one after the @ symbol, so you can copy-paste twice, or you can just type. That's so annoying, so horrible, please don't do that. But we ask ourselves, so if people just copy-paste anyway, what's the point? They're going to make a mistake in the first place. Like if they make a mistake in the first input field, they will do it in the second. And this is like a big deal, so if you want to kind of decrease hard bounces with email, inline validation is very, very important, that we know. Another thing that's also important is to be able to edit email. So one thing that we decided to do, instead of having confirm your email address, we're asking the email when it matters the most, which is right before you buy and right after you've bought. Because if I look at you, I sense that once you get that confirmation message after you bought something, like thank you for your order, your confirmation number is blah, 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 you don't close this tab, do you? No. You're going to check your email to make sure that you got that confirmation, that they can't screw you. Or if it doesn't happen, you're going to take a screenshot of it and save it somewhere. How many of you do that? A good number of people. So this is where you really care about the correctness of that email address. Right? This is where you care. You care right before and right after. And in both cases, we allow you to edit your email in line. Right? And even better, we also found a way to deal with passwords, because we wanted to block or avoid the word sign up or create an account, because it's not like everybody wakes up in the morning hoping to finally create an account this day. Now, here's the interesting fact about you that you might not know, but I do. So if I look at you again, I feel like most of you are using 2 to 4 kinds of passwords. Maybe. So you have one important password, like the Facebook password or the Gmail password. They will probably not be the same, but they have everything you ever wanted. Special characters, lowercase, uppercase, exclamation mark, the name of an animal, whatever, everything. They are secure. You don't remember them, you save them somewhere in a file, but you know, they are secure. Now you also have a third kind of password, or maybe you also have something quite secure for online banking and stuff like this. But you also have a very specific kind of password. Pretty much the one that you're using everywhere. If somebody asks you to set up an account, like an e-commerce site or so, oh, you're going to use that password. Well, I'm pretty sure about that. But of course, what happens is sometimes it's not good enough for them, right? So you have to add some lowercase or uppercase or something of that kind. So what do? No. You're not going to come up with a new one, do you? No. You use the old one as a baseline, and then you add some fancy symbols to make it complete the requirements. Which means that once you're finished with that input and bought that book or whatever, you will never remember it. So the next time you want to buy something, you'll have to recover password, which is pretty bad, right? So we thought, what would be a better way of asking for password to make sure that it's actually, you have fun typing it in? Well, here's the deal that works really well. So once you bought something, so the guest checkout is always the default. It's actually quite hard to log in or sign up. So the point is, we want to get all the data we need to set up the account, because we need your email, we need your account. We want you to be logged in and buy things easier, obviously. So the thing that we do is, well, once you bought something, there is a little line here saying, set your password and get an extra $15 discount for next purchases. This works like magic. Because everybody wants to get discount, and at this point, it's the only thing that we're missing from creating an account, right? So set up your password, and you open that thing. If you click on set your password, oh, this is what happens if you click on send to another email. By the way, oh, it's the wrong one. Let me just jump a little bit here. Yes, so this one. And you just type in whatever you like, and you're signed in, and that's it. So you never mention creating an account at all. Because at this point, you really want to create an account because you're going to get that benefit, right? And it's really, really important, because if you ask or enforce creating an account that matches the requirements, well, you will be losing money on the table, because 75% of people will not complete purchase if attempt to recover password while checking out. That's a lot of people. Right? At the same time, many people really do use this show to unmask thing. So if you want to improve your password setting up experience, this really works very well. And being able to show and hide password works. In fact, most people will unmask password after a few first characters, like the first or the second or the third. That's kind of important. And so many other things are actually in the interface all over the place as well. And I think it's actually pretty useful, so just I will show you the URL later, feel free to explore and use if you want to. So this kind of concludes the design part. I think it was important to show these examples. Of course, I know that most of you will not be able to use every one of them, and that would be crazy to use all of them. But I think it's really important to see what people are trying to do, and what maybe not to do, and what would be kind of a medium way in between to make things work. So I think that kind of having some sort of like a little signature can work. And as you can see, like there are many things in the interface which are a bit more playful to play with that personality. At the same time, they're not overboard. At least I feel they are not. So to the front-end side, of course, once we had the design, we had to actually build it. And the front-end part was really interesting because at the time, we had to think about browser support. And this is actually what you're looking at, looking at first. And we had a very comfortable situation because we had people like you attending the site or visiting the site. So we have at this point like 60–62% using Chrome. Firefox has lost a lot over the last few years. And Safari, it looks like people who are using Safari just stuck with Safari forever. They just never move anywhere at this point. And Edge, a little bit, Safari, Chrome. So in total, like mobile is approximately 19%, I think. But then we also need to talk about the ones who ones. And it wasn't really a big deal. So we pretty much could do whatever we wanted. And obviously we didn't want to support, like actively deal with A8, but more or less one way or another, we should be certain that even if you have JavaScript turned off, or, it doesn't happen most of the time, but if JavaScript is not supported, you should still be able to read all articles, right? So that was an important thing. Although that's not quite true, because we also have one person coming to the site once a year, once every 2 years, with an user agent being Internet Explorer 666. And it's not a joke, by the way. It's really happening. So I don't know if you're here or not, but I respect that. That's kind of cool. It totally screws up my statistics at the end of the year, but it's kind of cute, in a way. So when writing front-end, when writing CSS or JavaScript, we always follow a very simple architecture in a way. I think that most of you are actually following it almost unconsciously. Whenever we write, the properties we're using in CSS, for example, will be the order of those properties is often defined by this pyramid. So it's a pyramid coming from Petty Toland, who works for Filament Group in Boston. And whenever they build components, they think about speed first, then accessibility, then scale, then style. With speed means, you want the fastest experience, you want the fastest component, like the lightweightest component, if you like. It has to be accessible, like fully accessible. Obviously, it goes for text, images, everything else. And then you start thinking about responsiveness, the grids, the breakpoints, the order, the arrangement, the flexbox, this kind of stuff. And then you add style on top of it. This is where all the animations, transitions, web fonts, logos, colors, and so on comes into play. So when we write CSS, most of the time, we start at the bottom. There is not much CSS to write there. But it has to be accessible. Then you build on top of that all the responsive stuff, and then you build on top of this all the style stuff. All right? And this is kind of the thinking that we're applying to pretty much every single project that we're working on. Because I work not only on Smashing, but also on other projects. It also comes down to the decision of what framework to choose. And actually, it was very clear from the start that we wouldn't want to use large frameworks. The reason being that when you use frameworks, there are many unknowns, and I just don't feel comfortable dealing with unknowns because I don't know what's happening behind the scenes. And we didn't want to even use like large libraries, not necessarily frameworks. So I asked a while back how many people are actually using jQuery. How many of you are actually using jQuery production? It looks like it's fading away a little bit because in many ways we don't really need it most of the time. But sometimes, of course, we do. But still, it looks like many people are moving away from it. So we were thinking about using small libraries, as small as possible. Not using Modernizer because we can use feature queries in CSS. And not using anything that we don't need. This was kind of the goal. And in the beginning, we were just working on thinking about what would be the main environment to work in, just JavaScript or React. And we ended up using Preact, so the entire site is built on Preact. Although we probably will move to React now. And the reason for it is because many modules that we have to build with Preact now, custom builds for Preact, we could get them for free with React. But yeah, we didn't know at this point when we chose Preact that we will end up in this situation. We are fine, so it's all running on Preact right now. If you don't know what it is, it's not a big deal. We'll get into it in a second anyway. But it works, and it's basically everything we use. This is the only thing that we're using, more or less. We also said quite quickly no to media queries, and I know what you're thinking. What the hell? What did the media queries do now? Nothing. There is nothing bad about them. It just, it's not like I hate media queries. I just don't particularly like them. The reason being is that every single time we as developers plug in a media query, you have to kind of converge from one point to another. Or you have to, more specifically, you have to extrapolate, or interpolate? Interpolate. Extrapolate? Something of that kind, between two views. So you have a designer coming to you and giving you this perfect mobile view, and then giving you that perfect desktop view, or tablet, large tablet view. But then you always need to, in between, kind of make things work. And how do you do it? By adding breakpoints and breakpoints and breakpoints and breakpoints. So if you look at any website, you will find this kind of in slightly more critical and slightly less critical way, where you find these areas, green areas, where everything is fine, but then in between, things start getting off. Right? Navigation is a bit off here, this is happening, so what do you do to fix it? You add a breakpoint. What do you do to fix another problem? You add a breakpoint. And the more breakpoints you have, the more maintainability you have to perform later. And of course, we'll all be using SAS and LESS or Stylus or whatever you have, right? But in the end, you still have to maintain all those states. And if you have a major change coming in, because media queries refer only to global viewport and not the local scope of the component, it's a maintainability issue. So we tried to avoid media queries, and there was a simple way of doing this. Remember this layout? It took us quite some time to build it, and it's a separate story on its own. But how to make it responsive? That was kind of the question that we asked ourselves quite quickly. And the answer was easy. There is this notion of fluid sizing that came from Mike Rittmiller from Australia, and he mentioned this simple idea. Now, if you want to efficiently scale up and down any component, anything really, and keep all the proportions intact, what would be the best way of doing this? Now, the best way of doing this would be, imagine in creating some sort of a library or system like this, right? Would be to say, you know, we use RAM on the component's root. Anybody is not familiar with CSS at all? That's okay, it's a safe place. Okay, not okay. So we set RAM unit on the component root, and we set M units for subparts of that component. So now we need to make it bigger. We change the font size on the root, and so it gets bigger. We make it smaller, so it gets smaller, right? Because M is relative to the root, right? And if you set it the container's root in RAM units, it's basically whenever you place it in the layout anywhere, it's going to look exactly the same because it refers to the root unit, right? To the RAM, to the body font size. We could also use M for the component's root, but then it would be changing depending on where it is in the layout. So that's an old news. It's nothing groundbreaking. You just change one thing, one font size somewhere, and you're done, right? Imagine like plugging media queries and things like that. That works just like magic. The problem there is, very often we want to have not just a linear growth like this, but something a bit more predictable. We want a minimum size and want a maximum size, right? So for example, think about H1, the heading. You don't want it to be like 6 pixels at some point. You don't want it to be like 120 pixels at some point, just growing. You want it to be somewhere like starting growing somewhere and then stopping growing somewhere. You want this kind of experience. Now, if you want this kind of experience defined, to define this kind of experience, you can map the viewport, the font size, for example, for H1 on the one axis, and on the other axis, the viewport width, right? And if you do this, you'll find out that very often, again, it's not linear. You'll find that these points are kind of scattered all over the place. So if you want to describe this growth, right, you would need to define a formula for a function that looks like this. Now imagine here's an idea that we've been following, or just as an idea. Of course, it's not possible in CSS, but what if for every component, H1, H2, table, like larger things like lightbox, doesn't matter, what if you could define a function that would describe the behavior of that component once, right? And it doesn't matter where it is and what the width is and what the height is, it would be right because it's defined by the function. So if you define a behavior of a component once using a function like this, it will just work all the time because it's right all the time according to designer's intent and developer's intent as well. That's kind of the idea we were having. Now if you want to do this today, you would need to describe this function. You still with me at this point? So you need to describe this function. If you want to describe this function, you will have to solve this equation, right? I mean, in this particular case, and the more changes you have, the more font sizes you have, the more difficult it gets. It's really difficult or impossible to do with CSS. There is no, I mean, you need to plug in JavaScript and somehow. That's kind of ridiculous. You don't want to do that for every component. So the one thing you could do, of course, is break down this thing into kind of smaller lines and describe their behavior using traditional things like the slope and the y-intercept, and create this kind of functions for every single line. But we don't want to do that. That's just super annoying, because in the end, it means that you would do this. Do you want to do this in CSS? Probably not. But here's the idea. You can simplify it. You don't have to go all the way and create this perfect experience all over the place. Ideally, that's what we want. Not more, not less than that. You start growing somewhere, you stop growing somewhere. But it's always fluid in between. It's like naturally fluid. It's not like it has tons of breakpoints. It doesn't have any single breakpoint at all. You start growing somewhere, you stop growing somewhere. Again, something like this, right? And it means that you can use a function that will look like, just a second, let me see, I have to move a little bit over here. I know, just a second. So, yeah, okay, I don't have it right here, but you will have to use some sort of a thinking like this. So you have, let's imagine, like applying the same idea to line height, not necessarily font size. Have a minimum, have a maximum, and then in certain viewport range, you just grow from one value to another. There is a formula that makes it work, and it looks like this. I know it looks scary and weird, but it's actually quite straightforward. So here you have the line height defined using calc. Many of you familiar with calc? Calc, nothing fancy, CSS. It allows you to do some basic arithmetical equations. You can have the slides later, and it's like, it's not what we're using, but this is kind of the idea. So with calc, you can define the minimum, which is the first value, and then you add something to it. Now what do you add to it? The difference between the maximum value and the minimum value, which is 1.5 minus 1.3, multiplied with 100 viewport width units, which is where it's bind to the growth of the viewport, minus the minimum when you actually start growing, remember the 21 ems, divided by the difference between the maximum and the minimum. Again, coming back here, so we have 21 em here, this is the lower boundary, this is the upper boundary. We want to grow from 1.3 to 1.5 between 21 and 35. Right? And you kind of define it in here where you have the minimum, you start from 1.3, the difference between the 1.5 and minus 1.3, multiplied with the area you have to grow over at this point right now, divided by the total space you have at your disposal. I mean, I know it sounds ridiculous, but it actually does the job, right? So, but imagine having this kind of formula for every single property in CSS, where, like width, height, padding, margin, border radius, all of this stuff, right? Because you can create something like this, it works. You can use media queries if you want to, but you don't have to. Here we have exactly this thing, grow from 1.3 to 1.5, within a specific viewport range, right? And even further than that, if you take it to the next level and apply it pretty much everywhere, you can apply it to border radius and the padding and everything, and it actually will do the job. But there are two different contexts you have to keep in mind. That's what we've been thinking about in the beginning. Can we pull that off? Imagine having this kind of formula on body font size right here. So if you set the font size using calc, the dynamic font size, and everything else just defined in rem units, you kind of have it, right? You would pretty much have it. Of course, at some point you might need to have fixed containers. Let's imagine an add unit, right? It shouldn't grow like to 800 pixels or so. So you define a fixed container at the bottom to turn off fluidity in pixels, and then everything inside will be defined in amp units referring to the root, right? And this gives you this kind of experience. Everything is fluid, but that container remains fixed, right? No media query is needed at all. That's one thing. Another thing that's probably a bit easier to implement is to say, okay, I'm going to do whatever I did all the time anyway. So I'm setting font size 100% in HTML, as I always do. And then if I need to add or switch on this fluidity, I'm going to turn on a fluid container using this formula, right? And everything inside of it is defined in M units. It's kind of a different way, and you end up with this. Everything is fixed, like fixed font size, but that part in the middle, it's kind of fluid. The font size is fluid. And we thought, maybe we could do something like this, but maybe it's simplified for our layout. So if you look at this growth of the components, every single thing here, every single thing is defined using calc. Padding, margin, the font size, the line height, the underlines, the menu button over there, and the border radius around the menu button, and the SVG icon, and the width of the SVG icon, and the height of the SVG icon, and the padding next to SVG icon, and those buttons, the green one at the bottom with summary and table of contents, and the image, and the border around the image, and the border radius around the image. Every single thing, and the shadow, by the way, as well. Everything is defined using calc. And it just grows naturally. And we don't use that many media queries. I mean, you saw that break, the difference, like where you have the switcher, like the tabs, and then of course the position changes. Then you need to add media query, right? But everything else doesn't need it at all. And so every single thing here is defined using this magical formula, more or less. This is kind of a simplified way of doing it, where we just use the viewport width unit. Are you familiar with it? VW, VH, right? So it's all over the place, and it looks like magic numbers, and it's totally are. They totally are magic numbers because they empirically discovered, if you like. They just work for, they kind of give us the growth that we need for in a given scope, right? So many of the things are actually defined exactly this way. And yes, if you go ahead and resize all the time, you will see things changing because everything has to be repainted. You will see some sluggishness, if you like, but we don't optimize for it. You come to the page, you see the text, you start reading. This is what we're optimizing for, right? And at this point, it works really, really well, right? So that was one thing that we learned. It was kind of interesting. Another thing that we learned is to use namespacing. At this point, right now, it's not in production because there is some refactoring going on, but the idea is very simple. I mean, many of you will be using some sort of namespacing, I guess, in CSS. Are you? Like prefixes, like for, you can just break down, remember this pyramid that we're having? You can also break it down even further in smaller details and say everything related to layout will have a prefix L, everything related to something like structural objects, like media object or so, will be prefixed with O. Then you have something like specific components like model, for example, C. Everything related to theme will be T. And like scope content, if you have a CMS and the user has to be able to plug in whatever they want, it's actually coming from Harry Roberts, who was the first coming up with this idea, and so on and so forth, utilities and so on. And it makes coding and writing CSS and HTML so much easier, right? Because you know exactly what you have in front of you. Just by looking at the code, you know exactly what you're looking at, right? So you can just start writing and you know exactly what you're looking at and what options you have. It's very, very cool. And there are a couple of things that you can do with it because you can highlight some specific parts, highlight specific components, highlight everything that's related to components or to objects or to theming. So you can, and if you need to refactor, you can also have a prefix RF and things like that. So that's very cool, right? Sometimes you want to stop inheritance in CSS, stop cascade. Are you familiar with all initial CSS? So that's a nice way, a simple way, it's well supported to stop inheritance. Imagine if you have like a component inside of another component and you want to break the cascades, otherwise you will need to override styles. You can just set alt initial or just one property like width initial or height initial or font size initial, and then it's just going to reset all those styles, and then you can write just what you need for that component. Right? It's like encapsulating the entire thing. That's pretty cool. So we use it actually quite a lot as well. And it's actually really well supported, except you know who, but we're used to it, right? So there, things will look a bit different, but you will probably need to serve another style CSS for it. For refactoring, you can do the same prefix with RF, the RF classes, right? Where you can just use it for in production in order to find out quickly what has been refactored and what has not been refactored yet. So you can say, please highlight all the refactored classes or refactored components. Here you go. Please highlight all the not refactored classes. All right? Here you go. So you know exactly where you're at. That's very nice. And one last thing that we're also experimenting with is responsive suffixes, because you can also do things like this. So imagine you have like the idea being, wouldn't it be nice just by looking at the code, know exactly what's happening behind the hood, right? So here if you have like an unordered list, and you have a component image list at small screens and carousel at large screen without even testing it or looking into what it looks like on larger screen, you know exactly what's going to happen. The only problem there is you need to escape the at symbol in CSS, so you need to use this, you know, backslash before at small screen to write those styles. But it actually consistently works everywhere, right? That's pretty cool. We used a lot of stuff, like one of them being custom variables, and to take too much time to go through it. But one important thing that I guess something that's really, that at least I took away from this was related to performance. So just a few things there. We played with a lot of stuff, how to make, speed up the experience. And we moved to another stack. Technically, everything changed, so it was like a big deal. But it was also a question, how do we serve CSS and how do we serve JavaScript? And it turned out that one thing worked particularly well, in Chrome at least, where in the past we used to use this traditional link approach. You combine all the CSS, you minify all the CSS, and you put it in link to load. Right? But then we moved away from it to be a bit faster with this critical CSS. How many of you are not familiar with critical CSS? That's okay, it's a safe place. So critical CSS is basically a subset of your CSS that's required to render the first 1,000, 1,200 pixels of your site. So if you collect all of the CSS required to render the site, the first 1,200 pixels, and you push it in the header of the page, browsers don't need another request or another round trip to start render. And in fact, they will start render. So if you look at the new site, let me just jump here and show it. So this is the critical CSS, which is pretty much everything on the CSS we need to start render the page as fast as possible. In fact, there is no critical blocking resources at all, not even one. It's enough to have one HTML request to start seeing the page, to start reading an article, because everything is inlined. Well, in here, the main parts for reading an article, for example, are inlined. And then, of course, like after 300-400 milliseconds, depends on what the connection is like, everything else is loaded in the cache, right? And we're using Service Worker as well to make it even faster. I can get into it in a second, but this is very important because we started playing with this idea. What does it mean? Do we need to create this kind of subset of CSS for every single kind of pages that we have? The job board, the conference page, and so on. There are tools for it, so you can use tools, but tools were not good enough for us. Okay? I will wrap up in a second. And what we ended up doing was really interesting because we ended up first thinking about this in HTTP2 world. You could just break down all the CSS and just load them this way. But what worked better was to use those specific CSS components just when you need it. Imagine you have a comments. Right before the comments kick in, you have the comment CSS. You need article. Right before you have the main area or the article area, you load article CSS. And it turned out to work remarkably well in Chrome. This is a result we've got from a test. So the one on the left is with exactly that approach with the progressive CSS. And then the other one, well, you just push everything together. So this looks great in Chrome, but it really slows down everything else in Firefox and stuff. So we decided not to use it. But we still use this critical CSS, and we still compress everything. And then the last thing is web fonts. For web fonts, because we found a way of dealing with them in a very complicated way, but in a very performant way, which I conveniently call C2SFOFTRIWDURISW, also known as critical two-stage fourth render with data URI and service worker. Where the idea is very simple. You have two stages. The first stage, because everybody likes acronyms. So the first thing, you subset your font. You send the very small subset of what you need right away as fast as you can, probably inlined. And so everything will be rendered in regular, first in the subset of your font or the typeface. And then in the second step, you load the full font and you put it in the service worker cache, but first it's data URI, so it's coming faster, because it's coming in the critical CSS. And then you put it in the service worker, and the service worker then will serve it to you when you need it, and so you don't really have the blocking resources. So you can actually start rendering in 300 milliseconds. And it brought us remarkable results. It's actually, that's not so important, because the start render that we're expecting here is around, it depends of course on the connection, but on a good 3G, on a fast 3G, it should be below 800 milliseconds. And don't get me wrong, it's a single page application if you want it or not. And to be honest, it's a set of single page applications, but because everything is pre-rendered, it's way, way faster. Because what happens behind the hood is very simple. Moved away to another tech stack, 2 more minutes, promise. Moved away to another stack, which means we used to use WordPress, we used to use Ruby, we used to use a lot of stuff, and crap too, right? So I thought, maybe we could do it differently. The idea is this: every single thing here, every book, every article, every comment, every job profile, every author, every speaker, everything is a separate markdown file. Those markdown files are stored on GitHub. Once we have a major change or so, we just run a build process. Within 15 seconds, we can generate the entire site using Hugo as a static site generator. Then we enhance it with CSS, obviously, and we push critical CSS inside of that thing. We push it all to a CDN, no server needed at all, and we serve it from the CDN, enriching it with some JavaScript on top, like with Stripe for payments, or our custom APIs for comments and other things. There is no database at all. It's like, because we don't need it. Why would we want to use it? So it's all statically served, and of course it's fast because there are no requests at all. And because it's all like, there are no critical requests at all in the chain, it's coming within, usually on a good connection, the cable, you should be expecting way below 0.5 seconds, like 0.4, 0.5 at most. So that worked fairly well. And so this is also called the gem stack, by the way, if you're interested in it. And I'll be writing a big article about it anyway. So I know I'm totally overrunning. I'm sorry about that. I can just go for, I told you, I can go for ages. But there are a few things to take away from this. One thing, just try to break things a bit more because we can repair them later. Nobody prohibits us from breaking things every now and again. I kind of miss Flash. Is it bad to say that?
Yes.
I don't care. I kind of miss Flash a little bit. Not because I was a Flash developer ever. Well, I was designing with VRML and Flash for a while. But, it's kind of, we need a bit more unpredictability maybe every now and again. Like a little bit more personality would be nice. You don't have to go overboard. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for accessibility and usability. It's very important. But we can actually sprinkle a little bit of personality every now and again as well. And the second thing, we played with all kind of technologies to find out what works and what doesn't. And some techniques are weird, some techniques are not that great, some CSS is horrible because I wrote it. So that's okay. I mean, we're all here to fail and then we can succeed later. So in the end, my story over the last 1.5 years has been nothing but this video, which sums it up nicely. It's 1 minute and then we're done. It's a bit sad, but this is how I felt over the last 1.5 years. That's just sad. But I have cats. That's okay. We have many, many cats. With this in mind, thank you so much for coming. I'm looking forward, we have some time for questions? Maybe a bit of time? Just a second. So this in mind, thank you. If you want to check out the site, you can just go on staging. It's all you can go on Next, but it's not as up-to-date as staging. Staging is like Chrome Canary for us. So you can go to staging.smashmagazine.com. It's probably going to be live in 2 to 3 weeks from now anyway. So with this in mind, thank you so much for coming, and meow.